You're listening to ayahuascapodcast.com.
I had an important role in creating this fieldwork framework of discussions for the universe of ayahuasca, helping to legitimize ayahuasca as a field of studies because we're also stigmatized within academia. And even in anthropology, that is a science, not soft, so to speak, science that is not considered so serious by, biomedical researchers. But even within anthropology, that there is a whole openness towards the otherness, other cultures, religion, tradition, indigenous. Anthropologists study this kind of thing, exotic things that are not very common. But even within anthropology, in the early years, we were quite ridiculed for our studies. For example, you go to your defense of your master thesis and the professor asks, are you going to be serving that little tea afterwards? Which is kind of infantilizing and ridiculing your serious academic work. So our work, our consistency, our faith was part of a movement to legitimize ayahuasca as a field of work, of research.
Hi guys, and welcome to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, we do the host Sam Believ. Today I'm having an interview with Bia Labate. Bia is a Brazilian anthropologist and leading voice in psychedelic culture. She's the executive director of the Chacruna Institute, where she champions Indigenous rights, equity, and cultural integrity in psychedelic spaces. With over 2 decades of experience in ayahuasca and psychoactive research, she authored 28 books and is a key figure in global conversations on plant medicines and decolonization. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you. Bia, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me and for the kind words.
Bia, let's start with your story. What brought you to work with plant medicines, and because I believe in one of the interviews you said it felt like you were dragged into the vortex.
I don't know what interview is that. It's a vortex. I'm not sure it's a word that I use a lot, but basically, like so many other people in this space, what drove me to plant medicines was a personal curiosity, a kind of spiritual inquiry, and a taste for adventure and for finding new things and traveling and learning about other cultures. And so I had the chance to try mushrooms and peyote when I was backpacking in my 19s, 20s in Mexico. I did a big road trip across the Americas, traveled for 1.5 years, and was very open and, in that kind of pure early years that you're very wanting to change the world and full of love and hope and have more freedom and more time and more naivete, I guess. Still like young heart. And it was very influential and really changed my perspective on life and on being human and on being here in the planet, and took a huge turn since then. And later on went to the Amazon and tried ayahuasca and had different experiences both in the Santo Daime and UDV context and with proven vegetalismo or mestizo, curanderismo, and then Shipibo and others, and have since then kind of devoted my whole life to studying and researching, publishing, advocating, sharing, bridging, all of that.
Well, you said you were very excited and you wanted to change the world. I believe you are changing the world through your work, because I think your work reaches a lot of people. So it's not too far from what came to be. And for me, it also started from a road trip through Americas. That's how I ended up in Colombia, and then later on found ayahuasca, or jahe, how it's called here. You started working with ayahuasca 30 years ago. It was back before it was a thing. I think Google did not exist. Can you tell us about back then? Like how did you find your first ceremony? How was it?
I mean, it's funny that you mentioned the topic of Google, because I remember I was on this, just returning from Pucallpa, like right now, last month. And the last time I had been in Pucallpa was 25 years ago in the year 2000, doing field work for my PhD. And I remember going to a little internet cafe and asking a local, like, what is Google? It's just going in the middle of this little town in the Amazon. And he's like, es muy fácil, it's very easy. And showing me how to put a word in Google and it, appearing the options on screen. So it was curious for me to have that experience in the middle of a small cafe in a jungle town. And I guess, I'm 54. It's not like when I think I first had contact with the internet when I was 26. I had a blog at an early age as well. I started a blog in 2004. But for us, experiencing the world like that was not exotic. It was just the world the way it is. I feel the constant overwhelm, also learning about AI and Bitcoin and NFTs and everything. It's very hard to catch up. There's a lot going on all the time. In a way, it was kind of different to travel because you couldn't research online and you couldn't be in communication with your family. This big road trip, I kind of disappeared for 3 months. My parents sort of resent me for that until today. I did write a few letters that got lost in the mail, which was unfortunate, but I didn't call. It was hard to call as well. But it was good. It was, what can I tell you? It was some golden years. I felt a lot of love and it was a great privilege to have these experiences, to go and to find out, be curious, and just go by learning and asking questions. The key is trying to learn the language, talking to people, just asking questions, putting yourself in the position of a student and not the center of the action, but you're there to listen, to learn.
Yeah, I think the internet is sort of a blessing and a curse because now we can research everything about the place we go to, and to such an extent that we don't have this surprise or this awe and amazement of coming there, because we've seen some videos, because they're edited, they even look nicer than the real life. So, and same with ayahuasca, people that show up at my retreat, for example, they're full of information, and a lot of it is not a good information as well. And then you have to not just teach them, but you have to reprogram their beliefs and understanding of it. And it's funny because I can imagine, you're Googling your first word, and it would be interesting if it was your first word you Google was ayahuasca, but I'm sure it wasn't.
I mean, there wasn't a lot of things about ayahuasca like it is now as well. I saw a witness in my own life about all of this explosion. I'm not the first generation that watched this explosion. There are, researchers, anthropologists that went to the Amazon on the 60s. I mean, I'm not talking about early explorers as well, or Richard Spruce who found the brew, or I'm talking about more contemporary generation of researchers. I have a professor, Jean Langdon. She went to the Amazon, I think, 1971 when I was, born. Others, Michael Harner and the folks that wrote the Yaha letters, Ginsberg and but it was not so as I say, there wasn't all these offerings and there wasn't all this sites, and you couldn't really shop online like you can. And I agree with you. It's a paradoxical time. Actually, today you have to pay and good money to be offline. You have to go to a special retreat where you cut yourself. It's those paradoxes. We have never had so many means of communication on so many fronts. Every single person has a lot of different methods of communication. And yet we have this kind of epidemic of loneliness and disconnection. So it's kind of, impossible to think whether there's a connection between those two things. And this anxiety for new technology is completely like not replacing the lack of need for slowing down and nature, which is also a big issue for people, especially from cities. And I think that's also a lot of the appeal of the ayahuasca experience for a lot of people, is this sense of remembering something, of connecting to this generic feeling of being a human and belonging to a planet and having a purpose and a meaning, and feeling connected to the stars, to the universe, to the moon, to the invisible world, to the world beyond us, to this living web of connections, this breathing, planet Earth, full of these beings that we are in relationship with, and our other fellow humans, our kinship. And I think that's also why ayahuasca is such a boom and so desired, which doesn't mean that it can't be object of the same colonizing processes that we're talking about here, which is frankly related to the advent of big cities. And, we're not drinking water from rivers. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit going all over the place here. I'll go back to your questions. You have what?
It's okay. There's no fixed rules on what you can talk about, what you cannot talk about. We like to let it flow. But what you talk about, loneliness is a big thing. It's like we have hundreds of friends on Facebook, and we have all those people around us, but we are lonelier than we ever were before. And we have a lot of people coming here, and there's a group of people that they've never met before, and through ayahuasca and also through vulnerable sharing, they end up really connecting to such an extent that we have groups that people met each other for the first time, and now they travel together, they do things together. There's something missing in our society which makes this vulnerable connection possible. And I believe part of the issue is the internet, because everyone is so perfect on Instagram. So everyone thinks, oh my God, everyone is perfect except for me. So when people come and they share vulnerably and they actually talk about the problems, then they can, through that imperfections, they kind of stick to each other. And there's definitely an epidemic of loneliness. But one question I wanted to ask you is, you come from Brazil, and Brazilian, based on statistics, Brazil has highest percentage of people that worked with ayahuasca. It's an astonishing, like 0.8% or something like that, which is still a very small amount, but it's more than any other countries. So, like, growing up in Brazil, were you hearing about ayahuasca? What was the perception like, or is it just same as everywhere else?
No, it's not something that, everybody goes to school and have conversations about ayahuasca in high school, now, yes, more. But when I grew up, it was a bit demonized, frankly. It was a bit persecuted and pathologized. When I was in high school, we heard a lot about a cult in the Amazon that, gave people, brainwashed people. And there were a few scandals that happened in the early days as well, with people that left their families and moved to the Amazon and cut ties, or, accidents or things. And then there were some celebrities that came out and talked about it, but they were kind of also a bit stigmatized. There's a lot of media sensationalism. So it was not entirely normalized. It's not something that you would talk, in your family meetings. This is for me, the 80s, the 90s. I think it expanded from beyond the Amazon in the 80s to cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And then in the 90s, it became more and more popular. I think early 2000s, you could say that there was this explosion. When I did my master thesis, you had only mainly Santo Daime and UDV in the big cities. And the indigenous folks that lived in villages, they used ayahuasca among themselves, but they were not traveling to the big cities. I mean, there were a few events like, the Eco 92 summit in Rio de Janeiro. There was like some movement, but in general, the traveling groups of indigenous visitors to the city started in like 2003, 4, 2005. Now, 2025, it's 15 years later, you have an explosion of everything on all different modalities. But this is all to say that you could follow this process in my lifetime. I was witness of all of these changes. For me, when I wanted to do my master thesis, it was called the reinvention of the use of ayahuasca in urban centers. I had to take a subway and talk to somebody that would agree to tell me, as long as I kept him anonymous, meet in this neutral spot somewhere that gave me a telephone that led me to somebody that would be willing to talk to me, because I wanted to try to research what was happening in the margins besides Santo Daime and UDV, which were considered like the main official churches and the, so to speak, like allowed or permitted by law. There's some gray areas, but they were kind of holding this place of tradition in the imaginary, in the larger social imaginary cultural references. And so anything beyond that was kind of really edgy. That's like 1998, to 2000. I launched my book in 2002. It was still pretty kind of not so, there were like 5 people you could be counting on that. And today there's like dozens and hundreds of ceremonies each weekend. And same in the US, I have witnessed similar expansion in places like New York or Los Angeles, here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, Hawaii. There's some spots that are, more concentrated, but I'm sure there's also just a lot that we don't know out there.
So Colombia is actually the second country in that list of percentage of ayahuasca use after Brazil, which is not surprising because there's also like every weekend in every big cities, there's a couple different shamans coming and serving medicine, and they have their own circles. I've only been exposed to Colombian version of ayahuasca and Colombian tradition, so I've never, I don't know much about Santo Daime and UDV, and I'm sure my listeners also, like, it would be interesting if you could tell us, because you worked with different shamans, different traditions, in different countries. What differences you notice between, let's say, Peruvian tradition, Shipibo tradition, or I forgot the other tribe that you work with, Cachinawa?
Huni Kuin is, the name they gave themselves, and the self-denomination and the nickname by the Portuguese, the way they were renamed, is Cachinawa. But yeah, that's a very big question for a lifetime. The Santo Daime traditions and the UDV, they are kind of similar and they hold a lot of similarities. I mean, in a kind of more structural, generic sense, you could say they come from a sort of similar matrix, which is a combination of Amerindian shamanism and Christian influences, popular Catholicism, and also some Afro-religion elements from Umbanda and Candomblé. There are some elements of European esotericism. And so you could say that they sort of drink on the same source, but the rituals themselves are very different. For example, Santo Daime has a ritual that is dancing that can take many hours. This kind of standard dance to this side, to that side, sort of similar. Similar, it's repetitive. And, with the lights on, and there's another ritual that you sit and you close your eyes and it's more like a meditation. And the UDV has individuals chants, not like Daime has collective chorus. The UDV has just one person singing. You could say reminds you more of Icaros from Peruvian traditions. my experience with taitas and in Colombia, I've been 3 times, but I've also sat in ceremonies abroad outside of Colombia. I guess I don't mention that in my bio because I forget. I have done so many things. I forgot. I think it's more festive in a way that, it has can have the harmonica, and it's more expansive in a way. Shipibo is normally at night, and those are at night too, but with the very dark and very introspective and silent and kind of really pointing towards that inner healing. And I feel that other indigenous traditions also, Huni, Kuin, are more I don't know how to say it, festive or celebratory, but it doesn't mean that it's not healing. So anyway, this kind of question is the kind of question that I don't love. Just people can go, they can have their, experiences. It's not my job to translate all of these things, into words. There's lots of books. It's a lifetime. It's like, you're saying, what's the difference of the food in one country to another? It's wow, it's a whole other tradition. And it is good to think about these things as food, nutrition. It's just innumerous ways of cooking, innumerous ingredients, each cook is going to have one tip, is going to have one angle. It's this pot of culture, knowledge, generations, insights, layers, traditions, people, voices, sentiments, ethos. It's a lot of things. It's a whole universe. And the more you get involved, the more you think you don't know anything. And actually, the less you feel comfortable in talking about it, because it's also something you can really express in words. And it's just a very magical and powerful and enchanted kind of, understanding. It's a whole paradigm to see the world, if you go deeper in this path. And it's also not our job to tell everybody to do it, and it's not for everybody. Anyway, I hope that answered a bit.
Yeah. There's definitely this, I think it's called Dunning-Kruger effect, where the more you know, the less you realize you know, till you actually know more. This this graph. And people that have one ceremony, they're like, oh my God, I'm a shaman now. And the people who've had hundreds of ceremonies and they're really working, that they're like, oh my God, I know nothing, because it's so complex. And I think the reason you get asked those questions is because there's not that many people that have had your experience and exposure to so many different traditions. So, and also there's not that many people that wrote so many books as you did. You wrote 28 books about close to this topic. So why so many? What has driven that level of contribution?
I didn't write 28 books. I published 28 books. So I wrote, I co-wrote, I co-edited, I edited. There's different modalities of book production. And I think it's been a passion. What can I say? It's, one thing led to the other. My recipe for being so prolific, and the reason why I have done so much, is because I have really a method of learning by doing. So if I'm interested in a topic, I'm just gonna create a book around it and try to learn by creating it. So, a way to think a book is you think what has been done, and so you kind of map where is the discussion at. And even if you write a book proposal for publishers, you have normally to do some kind of session called competing books. And that session, if you look at it in a loving way and not in a negative way, is like a chance for you to examine the literature, what exists, what is out there. And so then you can say, I'm giving you an example, I don't know, there's a bunch of book in the 70s. There's a bunch of books by people that died. There's a bunch of book in Spanish. There's a bunch of, things on pharmacology on this specific aspect. But there is not this, and that. So that's a gap. And then how do you fill that gap? And then you kind of map everybody that's working on that gap on their different contributions. And you sort of compare what are, the pros and cons of each. And then maybe you have like 5 people that are doing similar work on this one trend. But then this one is kind of more, generic and speaks better to a wide range. So by like learning what everything exists, for example, our peyote book that we did when I was living in Mexico, I spent about 6 months mapping all the things that had ever been published about peyote on all fields: history, pharmacology, indigenous uses, legal matters. And then we create a book collection that is representative of this whole. For example, now I've been really wanting to do a book about the new indigenous urban uses of ayahuasca in Brazil, because my master was about the expansion of Santo Daime and UDV to the big cities, that first wave that I mentioned before. Now there's a new wave since mid-2000s of an explosion of a new phenomenon. So there's a lot of different theses out there. If you create a collection and you get the best of what is out there, you really help launch the field. You create the framework for the conversation. So I'm not the only one, and it's not just me. There's other people doing this, but I had an important role in creating this fieldwork framework of discussions for the universe of ayahuasca, helping to legitimize ayahuasca as a field of studies, because we're also stigmatized within academia, and even in anthropology, that is a science, not soft, so to speak, science that is not considered so serious by, biomedical researchers. But even within anthropology, that there is a whole openness towards the otherness, other cultures, religion, tradition, indigenous. Anthropologists study this kind of thing, exotic things that are not very common. But even within anthropology in the early years, we were quite ridiculed for our studies. For example, you go to your defense of your master thesis and the professor asks, are you going to be serving that little tea afterwards? Which is kind of infantilizing and ridiculing your serious academic work. So our work, our consistency, our faith was part of a movement to legitimize ayahuasca as a field of work, of research. And I have co-hosted in the Brazilian Anthropological Association, working groups on religious and traditional and sacred plant uses, combined with other social phenomena that is also kind of stigmatized and marginalized. And we have had these working groups for many years. So it's three days of conversation. And, each day is a different topic, and you have 7 papers each day, and you have people coming from all over the country. And when we first launched this, there was, hardly any persons. And now we always have to reject, a bunch of theses. I have a publication that I did, I think 2008 or something. That was it was a balance of the field of references, academic references that were ever published about ayahuasca. And we tracked down over 500. This is like, it would be very hard to do such work this day. I have done a lot of work of keeping up with the bibliography, and it exploded as well. Reality is after, the literature is after reality. So the reality goes faster, and then the researchers go trying to catch up. And so there was a time that we could kind of map rituals, churches, phenomena, and the literature. And then there's an explosion of all of that. I got overwhelmed, I also had a kind of burnout of trying to keep up. And it's been like drinking ayahuasca itself. There's been different waves. There's moments of deep enthusiasm and deep love for the studies. And there's moments that it feels a little stuck and uninteresting. And then, I'm just coming back from a diet with ayahuasca. And it was very interesting because the maestro told us, don't read. Try to silence your mind. But, if you read something, you should read something spiritual, and then there's this library full of books of ayahuasca. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to read a book about ayahuasca because that's academic for me. I'm going to start to have thinking about like references and why was this quoted. Anyway, after a few days, my friend got the book and bought it and gave it to me, a book. And I decided to read. And then I started to read the book in my diet. And I started to think it was so extremely interesting. And I started to laugh a lot at myself because basically I was thinking, wow, it's so interesting to read about ayahuasca. Like I came to day one all over again. I was completely fascinated with the study of ayahuasca and thinking about the diet that I was doing and reading the book. And then I had a big book diet. I was thinking a lot about all the books that I published and, how I want to publish other books and how other teammates in Chacruna should have a chance to publish their books, and came back with a bunch of ideas of new books and extending, that book vision to colleagues in Chacruna and seeing the need to digitalize materials. Anyway, this is kind of really nerdy. I don't know why you got me talking about all of this random, very obscure academic interest in ayahuasca books.
This episode is sponsored by La Guaira Ayahuasca Retreat. Most of you know La Guaira if you've been listening to this podcast for a while. Some of you might have already been to La Guaira before. For those who don't know us yet, we started La Guaira with my wife 4 years ago. At La Guaira, we combine authenticity, accessibility, and affordability. La Guaira is currently highest rated ayahuasca retreat in South America with more than 630 5-star reviews and an average rating of 5 stars. If you come to La Guaira, you'll experience powerful, authentic ceremonies led by our indigenous shaman, Fernando, in a very beautiful venue just 1 hour south of Medellin, Colombia. We're surrounded by nature and have comforts like hot water, Wi-Fi. At La Guaira, our team has guided more than 2,000 people through this life-changing transformation of ayahuasca experience. At the same time, we keep it very affordable. At the moment, we have retreats starting at as low as $645. So whether you're coming for healing, clarity, or a deeper connection to yourself, La Guaira is the best choice. If it is your first time drinking ayahuasca, you will love our 3.5-hour preparation course and integration support. All of that is included in price, as well as pickup from Medellin, accommodation, and ayahuasca. There are no hidden fees. Visit laguaira.com to book your retreat or learn more. La Guaira, connect, heal, grow. LAWAYRA.com. No, but that's what you enjoy talking about, and that's the whole idea. I don't want it to be boring for you. So you mentioned that you're on dieta right now. So can you maybe talk to us about? So you learn by doing, and you learn by doing. If you want to learn something, you write a book about it. I learned by doing, but when I'm fascinated with the topic, I start a business about it. So I started an ayahuasca retreat, which is very, very successful and very beautiful. But I struggle a lot with the balance between my own spiritual journey and the business and entrepreneurship, which is a very different energy, almost opposing. How do you balance your academic pursuits with your own spiritual work, like writing all those books? Like, do you ever find yourself in a ceremony where you're like deep with the medicine and having your own experience, and there's like a narrator voice, like, what am I going to write? How am I going to describe this in the book or something like that?
I mean, that's a really good question. And it's a really dense question for me because it's a question that goes back, 30 years of my life. And it's kind of the essence of everything for me, how to combine all these other aspects. I do want to cheat a bit by your question and just say that I want to encourage a reflection about ayahuasca businesses. What you said about yourself is interesting, and there's a chapter in a book of ours that's called Global Ayahuasca Entrepreneurship or something, and it's talking exactly about how the business of ayahuasca is different than other businesses, because in a lot of industries you have all these investors or people coming in and trying to create profit. A lot of the ayahuasca centers and related economies, let's say the paraphernalia, the textiles and paintings and CDs and all, tobacco or things that go together with it. A lot of it is started by people like yourself that fell in love with ayahuasca and then created an ayahuasca business and ayahuasca retreat. And then there's kind of this paradox that, so a lot of people feel like, I want to drop out and I'm tired of capitalism, individualism, consumerism, and shallow, Western society, and I'm going to go to the Amazon, drink ayahuasca and help others do the same. But by doing that, they're also bringing this economy to the world of ayahuasca. And then there's also these paradoxes that are associated to this growth, which has not always been positive for local people and sometimes have even increased the difference between foreigners and locals. And also, frequently locals are in a position of less power and are not like the leaders of the retreat or end up working as, chauffeurs or maids or, cleaners or the generic shaman, but not a real active agent. So that's an interesting discussion about the economy of ayahuasca. I don't know anything about you or your center, and I'm not trying to get into any merits here. I'm just saying that that's a good discussion. And I think that a paradox for founders of centers, it's also I'm an advisor to a few centers. I have helped Mestizo Vegetalista for over 10 years as kind of, assisting him with issues, and more recently had other experiences, helping in the foundation of a retreat and consult with retreats. And it's a big challenge for retreats as well to find this balance. Like you want to announce, you want to market because you need clients, but you can't say this is going to work and, pay and your success is guaranteed. And there's a lot of issues around marketing and whether it's like ethical to try to push on people to drink ayahuasca because it's not for everybody. And there can be like situations where it's not helpful and there can be, problems like just with putting it in social media and making claims. So I have, helped people try to navigate where to find a balance of ethical ayahuasca businesses that is not like making it a panacea, is not trying to fish for new beginners all the time and yet have to keep it rolling to pay the staff, to pay the people that are involved. And I think all of this balances between, I can make a joke. I was like 20 years fanatical for ayahuasca and 9 years fanatical for Chacruna. The joke is Chacruna is the nonprofit, but it's named after ayahuasca. So in a way, I kind of never got out of it. But yeah, I'm just going to say I had different phases. I had phases where I was completely in love and enamored and thought that was the ultimate thing of humanity. I had phases where I was very disillusioned, especially with the patriarchy, the politics, macho leaders and lack of transparency and problematic, leaders. I think the main challenge is like charismatic leaders that, people tend to project on them like all the, benefits from the experience and lack of, clarity on a lot of like integrity issues, and not to talk about sexual abuse, which happens. And then I have phases of being re-enchanted. And, as I said, I'm just coming out of this experience, which was so incredible. I had moments of deep happiness, of deep contemplation, and deep gratitude. I had like a journey through my life that is just kind of unique, that it's hard to get. I don't know how to get something like that. I mean, it is really my path. And I feel really blessed. I feel really lucky. And one thing that I have struggled with is disintegration circles, because from where I come from my early years in ayahuasca, there was never integration. And we kind of learned not to talk a lot about it. It's kind of personal and intimate. So it would be some kind of like spiritual voyeurism, to spiritual nudism, to like look at it and try to see what everybody else is doing. And just feeling a lot like, people like competing with each other, who had the best experience and looking at the other one and saying, oh, he had that, he saw that, I didn't see that. And like seeing that create, expectations on people because they would hear other people sharing and then they want to feel that. And then they're treating ayahuasca like it was some kind of jukebox that you put a coin and a music spits out. And sometimes it doesn't work and it's not like that. So I've struggled with integration. I've also struggled with learning, understanding what people say in English, like the next day of a ceremony, feeling like tired, didn't sleep well, and have to sit in this circle for hours to listen what people have to say. But I also try to keep an open mind, and I know a lot of people like that and need that and feel for them it's so incredibly like wild and novel. And a lot of people also just like a lot of awareness around like therapeutic basic processes to like see, oh, I'm feeling this. And then inquiry, oh, why am I feeling that? What does this come from? And just be so immediately like touched by your own feeling that you kind of don't, realize that this comes from other things. Like just seeing people discover basic things about therapy and self-knowledge, through their ayahuasca experiences or thinking about eating. What are they putting in the bodies? So I think a lot of these retreats have a lot of like, are important for people, and I can understand the value. And so I think by this answer, I'm saying like different people need different things. And for me, some of the integration stuff has like raised my more critical intellectual mind, and I don't like it very much. So you ask me, how do I feel, integrating different aspects? What I'm looking when I go to an ayahuasca retreat is not like talking about ayahuasca and integration and this self-reflection. I'm looking for a silence in my mind, not talking about it. It's true that I read a book, so it's complicated. Like there's a lot of angles, I can always tell you that particularly this thing of like, I have felt anxiety when I was forced to like integrate and talk, because then I start to be in the experience thinking about what I want to say the next day. Oh, this is a good thing I could quote tomorrow, and then create this weird echo inside your head when I like more, to pay attention to the music. Anyway, was that very confusing?
No, it was a great answer. You definitely went all over the place, touched lots of topics that I myself would want to talk about. So, like definitely the business of ayahuasca is as a friend of mine who he's a marketing expert and he works in lots of businesses. He said this is the most difficult business model out there. It's just too complex. So I think people who do it, they definitely do it coming from the place of a bit of jealousy, like this is amazing and they can save the world, and they get very motivated. And that's kind of what happened to myself. And the word circles, yeah, we do word circles, but we kind of limit the time to 3 minutes per person. So it doesn't get too, there's not too much of this spiritual exhibitionism as you talk about, like, look at me. But it does tend to create connection between people and helps them sort of memorize the experience they went through by sort of talking about it. It kind of goes from short-term memory to long-term memory, and then builds the connection between the group, and the people that having a similar experience, they kind of start supporting each other. So there's, but I can also see, I even noticed myself sometimes in the ceremony, I'm like, wow, this is great. I'm going to share about this tomorrow. So it's inevitable, I think, for even without word circles, people tend to think this way because they do want to talk about, and yeah, the danger of charismatic leaders as well. I've had facilitators that did that. They tried to get all the attention. They tried to be the person, or some shamans are like this as well. So that's something I'm acutely conscious of, and I try to actively avoid. That it's not about any given person. It's just about you and the medicine. Even myself as a founder, I'm not that involved, so people can't. Some people do still like think like, oh my God, you're so great, you did this for me. But I try to sort of avoid this because I think for me personally, it's actually not comfortable. to be like somebody, grabs you by the hands and they thank you. For me, it's difficult. For me, it's easier to receive criticism. But let's talk about Chacruna. You mentioned Chacruna. It's your organization. I've heard lots of great things about it. Tell people, what is it about? How was it born? And how can they? Why and how can they support you as well? Maybe some people that are listening would like to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Chacruna is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Northern California with strong ties to Mexico and Brazil. So we have a very diverse team, a lot of Mexicans, Brazilians, and young Gen Z Americans, some new team members in Europe as well. We produce mainly public education, and we have different programs. One we call the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas, that we give small grants like seed money to 12 different organizations throughout the Americas. The criteria to join that is that it's indigenous led and has a track record of actions, and it's collective led, and it's also grassroots and not already on the circuit of big philanthropic dollars. And that is a really cool project. We're trying to keep our donations completely unconditional of them, sending us decks or marketing materials, and keep the bureaucracy very low. So trying to do what we call decolonizing philanthropy, supporting sovereignty, self-determination, the projects and the leaders on their own terms. And then we have the program Psychedelic Justice, it's mainly empowering voices of people of color, so Indigenous, Black, LGBTQ, queer, immigrants, women. And so platforming, giving visibility in conferences and publications. So that's kind of our stars in our conferences. And we have produced different materials as well. We have our book, Psychedelic Justice. We have Women in Psychedelics. We have Queer in Psychedelics. We did a big work on the intersection of the queer movement with the psychedelic movement. We're very influential in bringing this together, and created the 2 conferences called Queer in Psychedelics, and then a big publication around it, and also a lot of materials around racial justice, trying to teach white people to self-reflect about whiteness and how to be a better ally, and social justice questions. And the other program we call Protection of Sacred Plants and Cultural Traditions, and we're trying to create critical conversations and awareness around the globalization of things like ayahuasca, peyote, mushrooms, and the expansion. So teach people about their religious rights. We have an important resource called the Guidelines for Religious Freedom Restoration Act and Best Practices. We also have a few workshops and courses for psychedelic churches, trying to help people self-organize and have accountability and peer-to-peer dialogues and awareness around topics like conservation and reciprocity, extraction, cultural appropriation. So creating a lot of critical conversations and what we call legal harm reduction. So we have, it's a lot of years and many different fronts. We have a lot of volunteers. We have a program of interns. We have a membership program. We have a fiscal sponsorship program. We have original books and publications, from peer review to online articles that are shorter and for a wider audience. Chacruna is a big, big, big network. We have started organically as a blog to publish articles from academics in more accessible formats. And it grew into different programs, had a lot of influence of social justice movement in the US, California particularly. And yeah, we're very enthusiastic. We have an annual conference called Psychedelic Culture. I would like to invite everybody to come. We're going to do it for the first time during Bicycle Day in the Bay Area next year. And we have a certificate on ethics, reciprocity, and ceremony, or the name is Ceremony, Ethics, and Reciprocity. We're working on a training for religious professionals right now, for clergy, like a Psychedelics 101. We're creating a new book on psychedelic humanities, and we have also a new book on Indigenous voices. I mean, I can go on forever. We have a lot of different programs. It's a big school, it's an incubator of ideas, people, new generations, leaders, thought leaders. It's a community-based, it's a mix between community, media, and university, kind of in between. It's not as hermetic and hard to get as universities, but not as loose and with lack of expertise as just like any other community member, self-invented organization. We have a lot of people, experts and people with a strong history in the field. We have 4 different websites. We have a branch, Chacruna Latino America, that we publish articles in Portuguese and Spanish. So we try to give back and, be connected to our roots. As a Brazilian who lived and worked many years in Mexico, I have both strong ties to both countries. And we have the Psychedelic Justice, the Psychedelic Culture website, the Chacruna website, and the Indigenous Reciprocity website. We also have different Instagrams for all of those. And just keeping afloat is a huge task, keeping existing on all of these different fronts. We have a network of about 80 people, but employees, very little. It's a lot of volunteer work.
Yeah, I can imagine how difficult it is. So, and it's very important, the work you're doing. So thank you so much for it. It's someone has to have those conversations because normally we just try to avoid them. And I know what Bicycle Day is, and I think most people do, but what is the specific date for Bicycle Day?
I think the conference is going to be 17 to 19, and I believe that Bicycle Day is on the 19th, the day that Albert Hoffman experienced LSD on a bike ride. Chacruna is more related to plant medicines, sacred plants, or there's different ways to call it. Not all of us don't love the word psychedelics necessarily, but we are part of this larger spectrum of the so-called psychedelic ecosystem. We are the ones kind of advocating for indigenous voices, voices from the global south, for anthropology and social sciences, for more holistic ways of learning and knowing. And that's kind of at the core of what we do.
So April 17th to April 19th, just to clarify. One of the topics you work on and explore is women and psychedelics. And there's this, how do you balance women's rights and sort of making women feel comfortable in the ceremony and sort of the indigenous tradition approach, especially around the time where women have their period, because it seems pretty universally very difficult to navigate. We have our ways we do it, and it works, and we're very democratic when it comes to that. But I don't know if you know much about it or something you can share, because you should probably know more than anyone because you wrote a book about it. So yeah, let's talk about this topic if you can.
The book Women and Psychedelics is recognizing different indigenous, non-indigenous, researchers or not researchers, like women as leaders. And we're trying to give visibility. If you think historically, and this is an example I draw from my dear friend and colleague who's also co-editor of this book, Dr. Erica Dick. Historically, women would participate in, think about the early research in the 50s, 60s, 70s on the psychedelic research, that women would sit, together with their husbands, and, they would help the husband create the protocol. They would help cleaning. They would help setting up the space. They would help comforting and talking to the people. They would help the husband who's afraid to participate. They would help the follow up, integrating the experience of everybody, the manuscript writing. Like they had all this presence, but their name was not on the paper. So there's all these figures, or, we talk about Albert Hoffman, but we don't talk about his assistant that, also was the first woman to try LSD. So it's trying to give voice to these invisible leaders. And a lot of men that go on heroic journeys had women sitting for them, taking care of them. Like this, people of color, the brown people, women, people that are taking care, are in the back scenes, that are invisible. It's like the big heroic guy that climbs the Himalayas, but the locals that carry his bags, they are not, figured in National Geographic as the leaders who conquered, but they're going up and down every day. And so it's a bit that spirit. There's all these people behind the great deeds that we don't see. And Chacruna, I have a wife, I'm a queer woman. We are led by women, and we like to pay attention to women's leadership. And we did this book first in Spanish, and it was even harder to find these voices in Latin America, in places like Peru, Colombia, Brazil. What are the women leaders, both in plant medicine and psychedelics? But this is not to say there aren't women doing important work on all areas, and it's not just women-related areas like giving birth or helping to die or helping to take care, but other kinds of leadership. And why don't we know them? They exist. So this book is trying to elevate that. And I don't see much of a contradiction or tension with the topic of women not being able to sit in ceremonies when they are having their period. I think I see it as an anthropologist that's part of cultural traditions and have cultural reasonings. I don't think it's I personally don't see it as just like an oppressive, branch of patriarchy. And I think there's a lot of reductionism in just projecting our values to other cultures. If you understand the logic behind those prohibitions, it's part of a larger whole that has, a lot of aspects, like this economy between men and spirits, with all these exchanges, and shamanism being this source of mediation between realms. So there's a lot of taboos, so to speak, related to hunting or, ways to debone the game, and like what species are you allowed to hunt, and how many, different animals are you allowed to take, and what are the correct ways to taking them down. And, the logic of this economy of exchange between us, animals, the ancestors, the invisible world. And one of the things that are said is that spirits don't like maybe the smell of dead blood. They like perfumes, and there's a way to seduce them, to talk to them. There's all these other explanations, these logics of exchange, of donation, of reciprocity, with this set of web of life that are like the native explanations for this prohibitions that have to do with the same idea of the diets, of creating this dialogues, with the world of the species, the plant species, learning how to incorporate that knowledge, that sentient being, that plant that has an agency, that has intentionality, that is alive, that is a being, that is ultimately like a human, like you, that has a culture, that has a personality, has an understanding, losing your humanity and being in dialogue with these plants and letting them sit on you and teach you, and, following the tests, the prescriptions, the different periods, and trying to be more open and sensitive to things like dreaming and, just deeper forms of knowledge, embodied forms of knowledge that these traditions take, that I don't think is just, saying men want to oppress women. And yet, yes, perhaps there are some social complications, and there has been also processes of women from different indigenous communities that were not allowed to take diets and that have fought their rights, and they are leaders of diets right now and are big leaderships. Men wanted to be protective of women and were, worried about women being able to take care of children and didn't want to force them to go through these difficult experiences. But women have also advocated for their rights and have changed traditions. So there's a lot of ways to look into it. And it's a big, complicated topic. I think the best way to go about it is if you're going to a certain tradition, try to get informed and try to talk and ask the rationale and listen and pay attention and not just bring your own ideas, to the mix.
Yeah, thank you for this explanation. I agree with this as well. We have to find the balance, but we can't just come to a tradition and only take the things we like and reject the things we don't like, and it comes in a package. And then in the spirit of you saying, there's women behind all the men doing cool things. Yeah, my wife is a co-founder of the Wire, and she, we have 3 kids together, and we started from the beginning. It was just me, her, and the shaman. That's it. And we did everything from cooking, cleaning to washing buckets, and definitely would not be possible without her. So, but she's definitely not in hiding. Every group that comes, they meet her, and she's still in charge of everything, all the hospitality related stuff of the running the retreat. So she's not listening to this podcast because she doesn't really speak English, but I keep telling her to listen because I mentioned her a lot. So if you're listening, I love you. So one last question, which is really interesting for me, because in one of the interviews that I've heard of you in preparation for this podcast, you said that there's some reason to believe that ayahuasca originally comes from Colombian Amazon. Where can I find more about it? Where did you find about it? And where, how did they manage to figure that out?
I mean, there's a large discussion about this. It's not something set in stone, and it's also a little bit controversial. I think maybe you could try to have some Indigenous speaker come to your podcast, and it's been more and more those of us that are studying these topics are learning that Indigenous people want to have, they don't need the voice of anthropologists, and we're happy to continue to be allies and support our Indigenous partners and friends. But I think it would be good to get also Indigenous speakers on your podcast. So I'm just going to suggest that you find an Indigenous scholar and speaker and invite with the same questions. There's different theories, and it's a kind of controversial topic, and perhaps I'm just going to leave it like that.
Okay. Anyone specifically you want to recommend I interview on the topic? Somebody Indigenous?
Well, we can talk more offline, but we have a bunch of resources in Chacruna too, recommending different people of color. We have a page, People of Color. We have another one, Psychedelic, Indigenous Voices in the Psychedelic Renaissance. I think that's, I would even ask you, are you interviewing your own, local healers?
I mean, we have I have a podcast with my shaman. I think it's about 10 episodes ago. So, but I don't think he knows those things. That I asked him, he knows the story of creation of ayahuasca. They all have their own story, but that's I would like to hear that answer from the anthropologist. But
that's exactly the problem. What is the timeline? Are we talking about stories of creation? Or are we talking about, you found a ceramic pot in the Amazon with which date? What is the science that we're listening to? That's the challenge. Because the immemorial narratives, they don't match necessarily what's, are we going to consider like Richard Spruce, who named ayahuasca, or, you know what I'm saying? Like there's different stories, and this question became kind of political of different epistemologies, different timelines.
Let's assume we don't really know, but yeah, it comes from Amazon. Let's settle at that. But yeah, I've heard you.
Well, the UDV says that it was from King Solomon, so they have their own like original myth, which they don't think is a myth. They think it's a historical timeline.
King Solomon, like from Israel, as in maybe like using their own plants, like mimosa and something like that. Where did he get the vine from if it doesn't grow there?
I mean, that's like, you go into the story of them. They have their own like narrative. But yes, I agree with you. It comes from the Amazon. And it's also spread, all over. You have plantations now in places like Puerto Rico, or maybe a bit in Florida, Hawaii. Have different people studying the DNA, trying to figure out how it migrated one place to another.
It's really cool, the Hawaiian ayahuasca story. I interviewed Dennis McKenna like maybe a month ago, a bit less. And it's basically was, I believe it was his brother that brought the ayahuasca from Peru to Hawaii, and now it's spread all over. It's crazy how one person's actions today can change the world 20 years from now. So,
well, it's a variation of what I was saying. We're all witnesses of this expansion. When I was telling you my timeline, what I did in my master's, what I did in my PhD, this work in Chacruna, it's all different phases of the ayahuasca movement. I'm friends with Kat Harrison. She went to the Amazon in 1976. She's ex-wife of Terence McKenna, who's passed. She was there in 1976. That was on Google. I was 5 years old. And yes, Terence and Dennis brought ayahuasca back, and they planted. And ayahuasca is kind of a plague, if you will, in a more like strictly ecological terms in the island, because it's a species from the outside, and it grows very fast, and it's kind of taken over. It's very interesting because, it grows very fast. It's a kind of really vitamined land that it has a lot of properties, and it grows fast and it takes over. And also a lot of people have land, and they can grow their own ayahuasca in their backyards. So it's a very interesting scenario where you have a lot of different people growing ayahuasca everywhere, and you have a whole economy of ayahuasca being brewed in Hawaii and shipped internally to the US because it doesn't pass immigration. So there's less risks of it being, caught. And so there's this whole economy of people creating, planting ayahuasca, harvesting and cooking and spreading it, and going to other islands. Also, Australia has a lot of ayahuasca plantations. It's a global phenomenon at this point.
It's a plague, but it's a beautiful plague. And yeah, because in Amazon, the soil is very infertile. It's very hard. So it's a plant that's used to less nutrients, and then you bring it somewhere where there's lots of nutrients in hot weather, and it probably grows very quickly. But yeah, when I heard you mentioning Colombia, that ayahuasca might come from Colombian Amazon, I just felt really good, because I'm sort of on a bit of a mission where when I first learned about ayahuasca, I thought it's something you do in Peru. And then I was already kind of living in Colombia back then, or being here for a long time, and it was completely unknown. So I'm trying to sort of spread the word and educate people that ayahuasca is from Colombia, and it's actually very traditional, and it's absolutely much more traditional than Costa Rica, which doesn't really have anything to do with ayahuasca traditionally, and that Richard Evan Schultes came here to do his research, and Dennis and Terence, they came here looking for this other plant medicine as well. So, and then Narcos happened, and it kind of derouted and kind of erodes that part of the history. So when you said that, I got excited and I Googled it, and apparently there is definitely a discourse about that. So I am a little bit emotionally invested because I just hope to prove that ayahuasca is in Colombia as well. And I mean, our website is still.
But it is in Colombia. You don't have to prove that. And so you have different indigenous rights that are considered part of cultural patrimony in Colombia. It's also the constitution in Colombia is really one of the most advanced in the matter of indigenous voices and recognizing a bit some rights to nature and autonomy of indigenous people. You have different recognitions of ayahuasca in the health system. It is deeply imbibed in the culture of Colombia. It's very strongly documented, and I have a colleague. I'm just talking to her. She's working the national history and anthropology or archaeology patrimony department in Colombia, and we were just talking. There's a whole reality that I don't know who you're hanging out with, but in my book, nobody's questioning that ayahuasca is deeply, part of Colombian life. And I think maybe you're just influenced by, English-speaking guests that don't have knowledge, because in the world that I hang on, anthropologists and lovers of these kinds of things, we all know about this. I think we lack, we lack pride, frankly. And that's kind of common in Latin countries. It's still stigmatized. That's the thing. It's still kind of seen as not a part of culture, but it's on foundation. I think about Mexico. It's a civilization built with sacred plants, different psychedelics, if you will. Foundational, tobacco is across all the Americas. It is part of our culture in deep sense. All of these plants. And the stories, the myths of origin that tell how the man came to be are frequently intertwined with the story of creations of these plants. And there's immemorial times where, maybe there wasn't this distinction that exists between animals and man, or, things like rivers and mountains. And so there's another way to tell the stories that we tell ourselves. Chacruna is trying to give visibility to these narratives and to this storytelling, and retell the stories that we tell about ourselves, about the psychedelic movement or the psychedelic space, or what is psychedelic healing. Putting these voices in the forefront, putting this type of knowledge in the forefront. And it's a rich universe, as rich as, the experiences itself, the culture, the traditional knowledge associated to it.
That's important work to be done. And what you mentioned about Colombian indigenous people, yesterday I had a meeting with the mayor of a nearby town, and then we visited an indigenous community called Embera Chami. They traditionally used to work with mushrooms, not with ayahuasca. The tradition got lost. Now they're rediscovering it. And the government just bought a big piece of land in that municipio where they're going to do another resguardo, indigenous reserve for some displaced families. So it's definitely very, very active and very real here. So, which is really cool. And I would love for you to connect me with that Colombian person that does that. So it's really exciting for me. Bia, we've been going for a bit more than an hour, which is not what I promised you. So let's start wrapping up. Anything else you want to talk about, or maybe mention where people can find more about you, your favorite book you published they should read, or anything like that?
Well, you can follow me in Labate Bia at Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn, and you have our sites, Chacruna Net, Psychedelic Culture, Indigenous Reciprocity, Chacruna Latin America. Encourage people to become a monthly member. We have lots of perks, and we're a really nice community. We also have our internship program, where I have a few positions open. We're always looking for donations to make our work sustainable. And we also ask for donations for our Indigenous Reciprocity program. I invite everybody to come to our conference. We launch like a really nice newsletter that comes on and off. And I have my own website, bialabate.net. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you for inviting me. And yeah, sending much love. Big hug from San Francisco.
Thank you, Bia. Guys, you were listening to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, we did the host, Sam Believ, and I will see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support us and psychedelic renaissance at large, please follow us and leave us a like wherever it is you're listening. Share this episode with someone who will benefit from this information. Nothing in this podcast is intended as medical advice, and it is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you.